Hello everyone, it's James from kibblewatches.co.uk and welcome to my very first podcast. Not just very first episode, my very first podcast ever. So please forgive me if it's a bit rough around the edges. But this podcast is called Journey of a Watch Dealer. It's not called How to Become a Watch Dealer, though you very well might learn how to become a watch dealer through this podcast. I'm not yet a watch dealer, I'm working very hard to become one, and kibblewatches.co.uk is my website where I do so. This podcast is mainly for me to document my experience and my process of becoming a fully fledged watch dealer. I'm recording this now because I truly believe I will be a full-time watch dealer one day, and I want to share and let you guys experience the process with me. I think this is going to help people who want to become a watch dealer as well, or already a watch dealer and want to learn a few more things or listen to someone else's journey, or people who are just interested in business, or you're just in the car on the way to work. Whatever the reason, I hope you enjoy this first episode. If you have any questions, send them over to info@kibblewatches.co.uk, and I hope to hear some positive things and some constructive things. So enjoy. Okay, hey, what is going on everybody? My name is James from Kibble Watches and welcome to the first episode of I Truly Don't Know What. This is going to be the first episode of hopefully many in a new podcast video series. I'm currently recording all of this on my GoPro, which I dug out of a wardrobe, and I'm recording it via a headset microphone, or not headset microphone, just a plug-in microphone into my phone with a audio recorder, which hopefully is recording. Yes, it is currently recording. So the idea of this series is I want to talk about the journey of a watch dealer. I myself run a small business called Kibble Watches, which has been going now for around 7-8 months, but truly official for just over a month now actually, with a new website and everything like that. But I am not a fully fledged watch dealer. And my inspiration for this series is, I think, as do a lot of people, the future of video and everything like that is definitely audio and podcast. I think that's going to play a huge part in the future. And already is. You know, I find myself already listening to many more podcasts than I used to. I think this is a good sort of option to go down. As I was saying, the main inspiration for this is not only I think it's the future, but also I have had countless emails already, and I'm this early on in doing this whole watch dealing thing, on how to become a watch dealer. What is the process? Other young people like myself who are saying they don't have the capital to do it, they can't do it, all these different things. And they're asking for advice. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm not even in a position, in my opinion, yet to give truly great advice. But what I can do is talk about my experiences so far. And it got me thinking, putting all this into an audio package or a video package like right now, I think would be a great idea. And calling it the journey of a watch dealer, because it truly is a journey, and I'm so early on in my journey that I think it'll be really interesting in you know, a couple of years' time even to look back on this podcast and go, I remember when I was really struggling with that and I found the solution. And the great thing about this is I can talk about how it's been for me so far, what I've struggled with, what I am currently struggling with, and later episodes talk about how I managed to overcome them things. And I think it's going to play a huge role in the future of Kibble Watches, really. But not only that, I think it's going to be good for me, and this sounds really bad, but I think it's going to be good for me to look back on all this kind of stuff in the future, you know, and say that's where I was struggling. And as I said, right now, recording on the GoPro and recording the audio via my phone and all this background noise is probably not the best way to be doing this, and I apologize in advance, but the way I look at everything is you've got to just start. And that is how I began in this watch dealing thing as well. I just started. I didn't have the right equipment. I didn't have the know-how. I did not have the connections, but I just started. And I think that's the quote secret to all of this. But for the first episode, I thought it'd be good to introduce who I am, how I got into watches, where it all began really, and where I am currently up to. And I think the bin men are literally coming through right now as I get to this point. So we're just going to pause for a second and we will restart in just a moment. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that, guys. That was a short delay, but obviously to you guys in the power of editing, it was instant. I thought to begin this episode, like I said, we're just going to go through who I am, where it all began, and I thought the best place to start is actually pre-watches with me and what got me into business in general, because I have two passions in life right now anyway. I cycle through hobbies a lot, which we'll get into. My two passions in life are business and watches, and I can safely say they have been the longest passions in my life. I'm only 20 years old, so it's not like I can say I've been into this since, you know, back in the day. I'm only 20 years old. So it all began in Leicester. So for those of you that are in the UK, Leicester is in the Midlands. And for those of you who follow me, right now I'm currently based just outside of London in a town called Bracknell, and just before that High Wycombe. So I've moved a little bit and I'm getting closer and closer and closer to London as we speak. It all began very, very long ago in terms of business, when I can easily say when I was very, very young. I've always been into buying and selling things. Sales has been something I think just sort of came naturally to me from the age of, like, I don't know, 12 at school. I was the kid selling sweets and chocolates and cans and all the usual stuff that I think so many of us and so many of you probably listening did. But I remember it got banned. We were no longer allowed to sell sweets and chocolates at school because they deemed it wrong that we were taking money off of other kids our age and they were getting stuff in return. I don't see what's wrong with it, but apparently there was something wrong with it. So they banned that, and I remember the solution I came up with was quite ingenious, really. I decided instead, and this is at the hype, sort of at the height of Yu-Gi-Oh cards and trading cards in general, Pokemon and all this. I hadn't a clue how to play the game. I was fascinated in the value that some of these cards could hold, and the fact that you get a pack of cards for £2, let's say, and then potentially in that pack of 9 or 10 cards was a card worth £20. Like, that just fascinated me. But I looked at it and I was like, the odds of you getting that card are so low that it's not worth buying the £2 packs. So instead, I would try and get the cards off people via trading. And obviously, they banned us by selling sweets and chocolates. But obviously, we could still bring sweets and chocolates into school. There was nothing wrong with that. So what I used to do instead was bring in much more than what I actually needed, and would therefore trade for Yu-Gi-Oh cards or Pokemon cards, sweets and chocolate for the ultra rare ones. And obviously, when you're 12, 13, if you've got a £20 card and someone's offering you a can of Dr. Pepper and a Snickers for it, you're 12, 13 thinking, that is a lot of sugar. I'm so going to say yes to that. And I used to be able to trade for these £20, £30 Yu-Gi-Oh cards with stuff that altogether, because I used to buy in bulk when we used to go to places like Macro, it probably cost me like 70p for these £20 cards. So I was probably very, very mean and ripping people off, really. Now I look back on it, but at 12, 13 years old, I didn't really know any different. And I used to go into, because at this kind of time I was painting Games Workshop models, and these are these little models that, again, adults would play the game, but I was more fascinated in the painting and the creative side of things. But I used to go to these, and a lot of these adults would also play Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon, because it was that kind of group of people. And I would come in with these cards that I traded a can of Dr. Pepper and a Snickers for, and sell that card to them for £20, and the return on investment was crazy. And I remember from a very young age that kind of thing. And at the same time, I used to paint models. So them Games Workshop models I was saying, I used to paint them, and I used to notice a lot of these adults would play the game, but their models would just be put together and unpainted. So I used to say, why don't you paint them? They're like, we like playing the game, we don't like painting the models. I used to be like, well, they look awful, you know, it's just a plastic resin, you know, like this plain grey colour. I'm like, how about you provide the paint and all the equipment, and I will paint for you on a very, very small commission. And that was like at 13 years old. So I had this little stand in the Games Workshop in Leicester, which I think is still there, and I used to paint people's models for them at like 13 years old. And I used to have my Yu-Gi-Oh cards and Pokemon cards that I traded for at the side, selling them as well. So from a very, very young age, I've always been fascinated with buying and selling, and just how, you know, you can trade up for things, and it just fascinated me, really. So it began very, very early on, and from the age of 13 as well, I think, is when I got my first paper round. And again, I was just fascinated that I could do a 30-minute round on a Sunday and make £4.50, as opposed to doing a round every single day, 6 days of the week, so Monday to Saturday, and make like £12. I'm like, it makes so much more sense just to do Sunday rounds. So I remember I used to go in, and because it was so early on a Sunday, and we're all kids, you know, we're like 15, 16 years old, most kids would not arrive, or they'd call in and say, I can't do it. So I used to take up the extra rounds and make the extra money. And one day I just said to him, like, look, why don't you just give me, because we had 4 or 5 rounds, I was like, give me all of the rounds and I'll do all of the Sunday rounds, and I guarantee you I'll get them all done within an hour and a half or an hour. And he sort of tested me on it. And what I did, I planned out the route of the whole thing so I could do all of it in one go. Bearing in mind, that's like 60, 70 papers. So I used to have one bag over one shoulder and one bag over the other shoulder. It was heavy. If you guys have ever done paper rounds at that age, you know how heavy these bags are. And I used to have like 60 on me, so 2 bags worth. And I'd do the whole paper round in one go. And I would make like £20 on a Sunday in one go in an hour and a half. £20 for an hour and a half work is not bad at all. So again, you know, from very young, I was always working, finding a way to make the most out of what I could do. You know, I used to work cash in hand at local community centres, just helping out, doing little things. I helped start a group called Creative Young New Parks, CYNP. And I remember we went to this event where there was council figures there and other people, and all these people with like these charities or non-profit organisations would go and pitch their ideas in return to try and get some investment, some money. And I remember must have been 16, or no, it would have been a lot younger than that, like 14, 15. And I created a pitch and pitched the idea of what was Creative Young New Parks, CYNP, which was an organisation which would allow youngsters my age at that time to come in and do creative things. You know, we had graphic design, music production, teaching them these basic skills to hopefully create a career one day out of. I pitched this idea, you know, little 14, 15-year-old me on a stage, like nervous as anything, with 4 panelists and all the people in the background as well who were there to pitch their ideas. And I remember at the end they were all clapping and really sort of like, that was great, and we got the money, and it was really great. And we bought the Apple books, or the iMacs, or whatever you call them, and the keyboards and the music systems, and we got it all going, and it was a real thing for a couple of years, which was really cool. So what I'm trying to get at here is, from very young age, I've always been into creating things. And from a very young age, I started on YouTube. I played a lot of video games. I streamed on Twitch. I always wanted to be a presenter. You know, I wanted to entertain. So being in front of a camera has just always been normal for me. I even did 200 days of daily vlogging on a very old channel, and all them videos are still up. They're incredibly embarrassing because they're terrible. I had a blue ponytail, like a little man bun that was dyed blue. The editing was awful. The whole videos were terrible. They weren't even entertaining to watch. But I did 200 days just to prove to myself I could release a video every single day for 200 days. It was just natural for me to get into these things. I got really into gaming. You know, I was a sort of low-time professional gamer, playing Counter-Strike and Call of Duty, and would stream on Twitch, as I said. And, you know, I had a little community. So for me, this has always just been natural. And I remember when I first got into watches, I would have been 16 or 17, and I had a little Casio. It was a little Casio digital watch. And this is when I got my first real job, working at Aldi, the retailer. And I needed the time on my wrist because we weren't allowed our phones on us. And if you've ever worked retail, I still work retail, it is definitely a clock watching job. You know, you're thinking of when's your next break or when do you finish your shift. I definitely needed the time on my wrist. And I remember the buckle on this little Casio, the pin on the buckle went underneath the buckle. Very easy thing to fix, right? You can take the buckle off. As watch people now know that. Back then I had no clue you could do that, so I just thought it was broken, so I threw it away. It was like £15, and I was like, I need a new watch. So then I bought a couple of fashion watches. I think they were like Accurist. I just liked the way they looked. And again, similar things. They would break, the straps would break, they'd stop working. I was like, I need a watch that's going to work, for God's sake. And that's when I started reading into watches, and I heard about automatic movements and many things like that. Automatic movements, vintage watches. And I was thinking, if you can buy a watch from the 70s that is cheaper than a modern day watch and it still works, that means it's been working for over 40 years. So the chances are it's going to keep working. That was my theory anyway. So I went online and I started researching. I bought 2 watches. I bought a Seiko 5 for £20, vintage one from the 70s, and a vintage 70s Citizen Eagle 7, which I still own today, and I bought for £13. Right now I have offers lined up for that watch for £80 to £100, so they've gone up in value relatively, but obviously relatively in regards to the value it was, you know, that's a huge increase, but because of how cheap they are, it's not really anything to brag. That is where it all began, with these little watches, and I just was so fascinated. And I was like looking on YouTube, and this is at a time when there was people like Jay Anthony and TGV and Paul Pluter and a couple of other people, but none of them were really talking about super cheap watches. Like, don't get me wrong, they were talking about Seikos and stuff like this, but they were still like 300 quid. And for someone who was 16, only just getting into work and at college, I was like, I can't drop £300 on a brand new watch. Like, it just wasn't a thing for me. So I was like, let me make a video just talking about these watches. And that's exactly what I did. I made a video, started a YouTube channel, and just spoke about these watches that I found for £13-20 on eBay, and said, you know, if you're looking for a reliable watch, get this. And I would go over its history and the different variations and all these things, and people really enjoyed it. And I think what made it easier was I don't think there was anyone as young as me at that time talking about watches. It just wasn't normal. I'm not trying to say I was the youngest person on YouTube doing watches at that time, but I think it was pretty damn close, especially at that time. And now you look on YouTube, there's so many young people. I think it's actually, there's more young people now on YouTube talking about watches than there are older people now, which is brilliant. You know, it's great to see. But at that time, there wasn't really anyone. So it grew, relatively speaking, quite quick. And this was at a time where I think TGV was, or no, it would have been Paul Pluter. He was the largest, and I think he had like, I think it was like 20,000 subscribers. So this is how long ago we're talking. TGV at this point had like 8,000 subscribers, and now he's got like 150,000 or something crazy. So it was very early on in the watch YouTube days, and the people like Jay Anthony had been around for already 2 years at that point, whereas I was just getting into it. And that would have been 2-3 years ago now. So that's kind of where it all began. And where it began for the selling was I ended up buying way too many watches. I think we all start off like that. You know, I was finding vintage Oris for like £10 on eBay, and I was like, this is incredible. So I was buying loads and loads of watches. I ended up with like 30 watches and I was like, this is ridiculous. So I was like, I've got to sell a few of these, and I started you know, making a few videos saying, I've got these watches for sale, if anyone's interested, let me know. And all of a sudden, I had offers coming in, and people were like, what is it selling for? And I hadn't even thought of a price. I thought people would come to me with an offer, but they didn't. I was like, okay, I paid £10 for this 1 month ago. Let's say £40. You know, it's in great condition. I was looking on eBay. You can't really find them. And I thought £40 isn't awfully expensive. And they were like, yeah, definitely. £40, sure. Sent it straight over. I was like, I just made £30 on that. And then that happened for like 10 watches, 12 watches, 15 watches. I was making a profit. I was like, there's, I could do something here, you know. There's not really many people at this time selling watches through YouTube and through Instagram. Let's do it. It just made sense. And that's when I started I had people reaching out to me. And a very good friend of mine, Andy, who I still speak to this day, his collection is incredible. You know, I'm talking AP Royal Oak 15400, white gold Rolex GMT Master. He's got just some absolutely beautiful watches, all over the spectrum, from Nomos all the way up. So great watches. But he had started off very the same as most people. He bought an insane amount of harness, you know, homage watches, very cheap £100 watches, micro brands, Oris, modern Oris, which I now own, the one he had, and all these watches. And he had accumulated them and had moved on from them. He had Rolexes and all these other great watches, so he had no use for them. They were just sitting in a cupboard, and he sent me all of them and said, sell them, see what you can do. And that got me thinking, like, I wonder how many other people out there are like Andy, have all these watches that they just don't know what to do with. They haven't got the time or can't be bothered to list them on eBay or sell them, and they're just sitting there. I'm like, what could I do to sort of get into that market? And at this time, A Collected Man was growing. And A Collected Man, for those of you who don't know, that's a website and a group of people who sell beautiful, absolute beautiful watches. They're like the ideal. And there was people like Theo and Harris that were coming through. At this point, he had like 2,000-3,000 subs, and he was buying, like, he was becoming the Rolex king at that point. You know, the Datejust king, as I think he's actually known. And there was all these people now selling watches, and A Collected Man had a thing called consignment, which is nothing new for anyone in sales in any industry. Consignment is where you take an item from someone on an agreed commission once it's sold. So you sell it for them, and you send them the majority of the money, and you keep 5-10% or something like that. But they were doing it, they were super picky. I think anything under £5,000 they just don't take, and anything over it has to be like either rare or beautiful or immaculate condition. So they were super picky, and I'm thinking, I wonder how many people are getting turned away by this. And this was at a point where if you sold on eBay, you were hit immediately with a 10% fee plus 3.9% PayPal fee, and you had to do all the work. You had to take all the photos, you had to do all the listing, you had to deal with buyers. And dealing with buyers on eBay is awful. For anyone who's sold on eBay, you know what I'm talking about. Like, they're just picky. It was a ball ache on eBay. So immediately losing almost 15% of the value of the watch when you sell it. And also eBay's a competitive market, so you're not getting as much as you could do if you sold on, let's say, even Chrono24. But again, fees on Chrono24 are very high. So your options are sell on eBay, do all the work, sell to a dealer, and if you sell to a dealer, they're going to bottom end you because they need to make a profit. And the margins in watches, realistically, isn't that high. So I was like, there's this gap in the market here. You know, there's these people with these watches. They want to get as much money as possible for their watches, and they know they can get a certain amount of money, but they don't have the ability to, or the time, or the effort. And I was like, let's fill this void. And it was very, very simple, really. I basically contacted these people and said, hey, I see you have this watch that you're trying to sell. What are dealers offering you? And they tell me that dealers are offering them, just theoretically, let's just make up a watch and it's £1,000 they're offering. I'm like, okay. And if you sold it on eBay, what could you get? And they're like, about 1,200, but the market is about 1,400. I'm like, okay, send it to me and I will sell it for you at 1,400 on a, and this is early days, I was like on a 5% commission. So I was undercutting everyone. And now I very rarely do 5%. My usual is about 10%. Depending on the value of the watch and how many watches, etc. But back then I was like, I have no experience, I have no reason for these people to trust me. I've got to offer them something so ridiculous that they can't say no, and 5% was that thing. So I was selling a lot of watches for a lot of people on 5% commission, just so I could get watches to sell. And I was amazed by the feedback I got. You know, people were like, this is great, you know, I don't have to do any work. I send you the watch, you do all the work. It might take you longer because you're not known, you're not a known watch dealer, you haven't got all the connections, but when you do sell it, you're getting me more money than I could have got myself, and also you're not taking anywhere near as much as the rest of the platforms and earning me more. So it was a very, very simple thing in my mind, and it made a lot of sense. Now, fast forward a year or so from when I started doing that, I created a very cheap website on freewebstore.com, which just, it did the job. It wasn't anything great. And I started building it up, getting on forums, going to Red Bar events, introducing myself to people, contacting other watch dealers, just really trying to get my name out there. Fast forward to now, I'm grateful enough to have a very, very good website built by a very talented guy who actually lives locally here. Things are going very, very well. You know, it's not always easy. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of watches I get in that I just struggle to sell, and I think a lot of dealers do. But that's just the way this game goes. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And the reason for wanting to become a watch dealer was just, it felt right. To anyone out there who has a hobby or a passion, you probably get what I mean. Like, something just feels right. I've always been into things, you know, ever since I was very, very young, I always had hobbies. And one thing that always happened with these hobbies is they'd turn into a very small business, you know, a way I could make some money. Some people look at that and frown upon it. They think everything you do is to try and make money. But the way I saw it was, I wanted to make a business. You know, I saw things that wasn't right in the market, whatever it was. You know, gaming, I was like, there's not someone out there who's trying to be the best and also make videos and also teach. Now there's loads, and it's a completely oversaturated market. But back then it wasn't. Games Workshop, you know, painting models, there was this gap, and I was like, let me fill it. The paper round, I was like, that I could bring value to the owner of this business and bring myself in return a lot of value as well. And that's what it always was. So for me, it was just a natural progression from getting into this hobby and really enjoying watches and talking about watches. Like, literally, I would talk about watches all day, every day. And it was just a natural progression for me to try and make my life watches. And with all the other hobbies I ever had, it faded pretty quickly, to be honest. You know, I would be into it for 4 months, 5 months at max, you know, a year in some lucky cases. And I'd sort of just fall out of love with it and go on to the next thing. You know, I was young and very eager and very optimistic in the world. Whereas now, this has been with me for 3 to 4 years. So it's definitely something I've dedicated my life to. You know, I moved from Leicester to High Wycombe to actually build a career in this. You know, to be closer to London for watch dealing is perfect, but also I now work for a jeweller's at retail. So every single day I have hands-on with watches at retail, and I come home and have hands-on with all the watches I have for sale on the site. So every single day off, every single waking moment is dedicated to watches. And I think if you truly love something, try and do just that, like 100% just that for 6 months, And after that 6 months, if you still absolutely love it and don't hate going to work, and don't hate coming home and doing the same thing, then I think you've found something you're going to stick with. And I think you should go all in on that, like literally all in. And that's exactly what I've done. That's why I wanted to become a watch dealer. It felt right. I think there was a gap in the market. And most of the watch dealers, other than people like Theo and Harris, are now a rising army, really. Most of them were older people, people who've been in the industry 30 years, and they're very used to the way things used to be. And the truth is, watches don't sell like they used to. We have Instagram, social media. The market is so much more competitive now that you've got to stand out. And if you don't stand out, you're just going to, unfortunately, die away. And that's the truth. And I've seen some watch dealers who have been in this 20, 30 years told me that they saw social media and thought it was a fad, didn't bother with it, and now they're struggling to catch up. I was lucky enough to have been born into social media, essentially, being 20 years old. When I got to the age of having a phone, it was normal to have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these things. So it was just a natural progression for me to post this stuff on there. So I'm very grateful in that sense to have been born when I was, to have grown up how I did, everything like that. And also talking about how I grew up, I grew up in a council estate in Leicester, and we never really had much, things progressively got worse as I grew up because of my dad unfortunately having a health condition and things like that. So I never had a lot of money, but I had an insane amount of ambition. I genuinely, growing up, thought I was something special. And I think still to this day, and it's a very arrogant way to look at things, but I still think I have something that I can give to the world. I look at markets and I think of things in my head and I think I'm a genius because of them. And granted, after looking into them for a bit longer, 50,000 people have already done it. But my point is, I see things a bit differently when I look at markets. And I genuinely feel like I can make a difference. And the great thing is, I don't stop. I keep going. And even in this, I have absolutely no capital. My family, like I said, aren't wealthy. I moved off my own back, taking a loan out with the bank, and was in debt when I moved. And I've had to move twice, and I was in double debt. It was not easy. And I had this huge dream of building a watch business, and I would speak to watch dealers, and they would say, you just need capital. That's the only way you can get into this industry. You need capital. And I was like, I can't get capital. I can't take a loan out with the bank because my credit rating's already awful. I'm 18 or 19 at the time. No one was going to invest in me. Unfortunately, my family, like I said, had no money to invest in me. So it seemed hopeless, right? And I get a lot of people emailing me saying, James, I'm 20 years old, I'm 18 years old, I want to become a watch dealer, but I have no money. And I'm like, you can still do it. Like I said, I found that gap in the market where people wanted to sell their watches but didn't want to lose out on a load of money. So I found a way to help them. And the great thing is, in any market, if you can find something that benefits the consumer, you're going to benefit yourself one way or another. And granted, the first few months, you're going to make no money at all. Still right now, profit margins are just something I don't even get to think about. Anytime I make a profit, it goes straight back into the business. My profit margins on commission usually cover just enough to the transport, but to and from London, it's not cheap. They cover the Red Bar events when I'm out afterwards buying drinks or talking to clients, or all these different factors that go into it. That eats up my profit margin. But the truth is, the reward in the future from doing that now is what's going to be worth it. And I think if you can just grasp that, and this goes for all ages, I want to say as well. I like I said, a lot of the people who are emailing me are a lot younger. My age up to probably the age of 25, but I know there are people out there, because I've spoke to them, who want to get into this and they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s even, and even older, and I say the same thing. You can do it, but it takes patience and it takes being different to a certain level. At the end of the day, the market's used to what it's used to, but I think it's going to change. And I think watch dealing is definitely that thing. I speak to collectors all of the time at these Red Bar events and all these other events, on email, on phone call, and I ask them, what do you look for in a watch dealer? Because these collectors have the most high-end watches, FP Journe, Rolexes, vintage Rolexes, Omegas, beautiful high-end watches, but at the same time have these obscure brands that no one has ever heard of, that they found on eBay for £50. That's the same person who's collecting both ends of the market. And also they'll have Oris and Hamilton in between. And that's not rare anymore. That's how the collector of today is with watches, because there's more information out there and people are searching for the hidden gems. When you look at watch dealers, they dedicate to a market, right? You have people who dedicate to Rolex on the top high end and Patek and ultra uber high end stuff, or you have people who dedicate to the lower end, the Seikos, the Hamiltons, or the mid market. There's not many that I can think of off the top of my head who cover a spectrum, and by that I mean from £50 watches up to multiple £1,000 watches. And the reason being, it's fucking tough. That's the truth. It is very tough to position yourself where someone who has £10,000 to spend on a watch will buy from you when you're selling next to that £10,000 watch a £50 watch, because trust and visual appearance, it's very tough for that person to go, wait, they're selling a £10,000 watch and also a £50 watch. But I believe truly that is changing. And I myself am trying to position myself to be a watch dealer who covers all end of the spectrum. If you have a Patek that you need selling, hopefully I'll be able to sell it for you. And if you have a Hamilton that you need selling, I'll be able to sell it for you. And so far that's worked. I've sold a range of watches from IWC, Tudors, and Omega Speedy Tuesday for like £5+ grand. And also very, very low end watches, that £50-100 mark. And the mid-range, is where I'm currently at, and micro brands and all these different things. And I usually sell to the same kind of people, if not the same person. There's people out there who I've sold to have bought multiple £1,000 watches, but also bought £50 watches from me. And when I ask them why, they say they love both ends of the spectrum, and now they've found someone who they can go to hopefully get both. So I think if you're going into this, don't limit yourself like most watch dealers will tell you. And it makes a lot of sense. I think I was speaking with a couple of watch dealers not long ago, and they were saying the way you're doing it isn't going to work. And I'm like, I respect what you're saying, but I respectfully disagree, because I just think that's the way the market's going to go. And you know what? If I'm wrong, so be it. I can reposition and refigure it out. But I'd rather do that than dedicate to Rolex and ultra high end and then try and position myself to then sell £200 watches. It's going to hurt inside, because the profit margins are completely different. I don't really know what I've actually covered in today's video or podcast. I think I've kind of covered a bit of everything. So I guess that's going to be it for the first episode of Journey of a Watch Dealer. So there you have it, the very first episode of Journey of a Watch Dealer. It was all over the place, I do admit, but hopefully what you got from this episode is how it all began for myself, and how you should just go for it, no matter what it is you want to achieve in life, no matter your goal, whether you want to become a watch dealer or a full-time tea maker, whatever it is, just go all in on it and figure out a way to do it. And the best part is figure out along the way. Don't wait for that perfect moment or that perfect opportunity to arise, because guess what? It never does. There's very few people out there who get that lucky. And I'm afraid if you're listening, you're probably not one of them, just as I'm not one of them. So just begin and figure out along the way. In the next episode, I hope to have a guest. As of right now, the guest is not confirmed, and the subject is not confirmed either, so it's completely up in the air as of right now. But hopefully it'll be something great, and I really, really hope you all come back to enjoy the next episode. If you have any feedback or advice you want to say, or any subjects, or even volunteer to be a guest on the show, send me an email at info@kibblewatches.co.uk. And don't forget, if you do want to buy a watch, sell a watch, or commission a watch, send me an email at kibblewatches.co.uk and go to kibblewatches.co.uk to see what I have on the site. Thank you all very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you all in the next podcast.